Hello and welcome. I've been asked by Carer Support East Kent to demonstrate a recipe using strawberries for the month of July. So we're going to be making today strawberry puffs. All ingredients have been very kindly supplied by Sainsbury's in Ashford. And this is to support 20 years of supporting care in the South East. Okay, now the recipe card should be supplied alongside this video. I've provided a recipe card to show you how to make puff pastry from scratch, or alternatively, there's lots of available options. You can buy a roll of pastry, or you can buy a block, which I have here. You can buy a block which you can roll out yourself. So there's several options in terms of time and effort. But first I am going to show you how to make the puff pastry yourself from scratch. If you've got the ingredients, it means that you don't have to pop out and find some ready-made pastry. It means you can just make it. And actually, once you know how to do it, it's pretty simple. Okay, so I'm going to start with 200 grams of flour. It's just plain flour. And on this plate here, I've got 75 grams of margarine and 75 grams of lard. I'm using a vegetarian lard alternative called Trex, and it works just as well, if not better. So the first job that you need to do is get your lard and margarine on a very cold plate, and you need a fork. It's a little bit messy, this part of the process. We're going to mash the two types of fat together on this plate. If you're using something like butter instead of margarine, that will become very hard in the fridge. So you may need to get your butter out a little bit before you start making your pastry, just to allow it to be soft enough to mash. As you can see, mine is quite pliable. So you want it to be mashed enough that you can't separate the margarine and the lard, but it doesn't matter if you've got speckles of each colour there. Now, what you need to do is form your margarine and lard into a block shape. A knife is quite useful for this. And then you're going to divide it up into quarters. And we're going to use a quarter each time. And we don't want to waste any of these ingredients, so we're going to make sure that we use every last scrap of fat from this plate. Okay. Right, so with one of the quarters, I'm going to rub the fat in to the flour. So I'm going to put that straight into my bowl and scrape a little bit more off the plate. Okay, so the rubbing part happens with your fingertips. I'm going to just use a knife just to coat the margarine in the flour so that it doesn't stick to my fingers too much. And when you're rubbing, you're just using your fingertips. And rubbing the flour between your fingertips until you can't see any big lumps of fat in there. There we go. There's not a lot in there, so it didn't take me too long to do that. And if your fingers are all covered in flour like mine, you can give your hands a good rub over the bowl, then you're not losing any of your ingredients. There we go. Okay, so the next step when making pastry is to add very, very cold water. When you're making pastry, it's important that everything stays as cold as possible. And also, when you add your water, it's best not to add it by pouring it. It's best to use a spoon because you don't need a huge amount of water. You just need enough to bring your dough, your mixture into a dough. So I add a couple of spoonfuls at a time and I just stir it in. There we go. Just a little bit more. And you might notice I'm using a palette knife rather than a wooden spoon or spoon to stir this in. I find it much easier to keep the dough from sticking, because you can just scrape it off at the edges like that. And it's because it's made of metal, it's nice and cold. Okay, we're nearly there. It's nearly come together into a ball. See if I can bring that together. Not quite there yet. Another spoonful needed. There we go. You should be able to leave your bowl nice and clean behind. Okay, right, we don't want to fiddle with the dough too much, but we just need to give it a little bit of a knead just to bring it together and make sure it's smooth. And I would like to roll out a rectangle shape. So the best advice I can give to end up with a rectangle shape is to start with a brick-like block. So I'm going to use my palette knife to help just bring the edges into straight kind of shape. There we go. And I've got a little flour shaker here, which I'm just going to add a little bit of flour to the worktop so my dough doesn't stick. And when you're rolling out dough, it's best not to push down too much. Try to think of it as rolling backwards and forwards rather than pressing down. And as I roll, I'm going to just keep checking that I've kept my nice neat rectangle shape. I need to just keep neatening it up at the edges. There we go. And the other quite important thing to do when you're rolling out pastry or bread or dough of any sort is to make sure that your pastry hasn't stuck to the worktop. So every now and then it's best to just move it around a little bit in between rollings to check that it hasn't stuck to the worktop. There's nothing worse than having to peel it off and tear it. Okay, so when you've got a rectangle, a fairly large rectangle, you're going to mark out thirds on the dough, just with the edge of your knife, just scoring it. And then you're going to take one of your remaining quarters of the margarine and the lard, and you're going to dab parts of that on the top two sections of your pastry. And I'm just smearing it on here. This is what we're going to be laminating our dough with some fat. There we go. So I've covered the top two sections with some dabs of margarine and Trex or lard. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold up the bottom third and then fold down the top third. And I'm going to use my rolling pin to seal both of the edges, just to press them down lightly. And then I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees. And I'm going to repeat this until I've used up all my margarine and my lard. And it's a bit easier to have a neat rectangle now. It becomes easier the more times you roll this. Just a little bit more flour on the worktop. You can put some on your rolling pin as well. I'm just going to roll this out again. There we go, just a little bit of a width there. So I've created one layer, and now I'm going to do my next layer of margarine and lard, dividing my sections into thirds, and then I'm going to dab the margarine on the top 2/3 of my pastry dough. And what we're hoping to do is creating layers of fat between the layers of dough. And this is going to be what causes or creates our layers in our pastry. Okay, and again, keep my empty third. I'm going to fold onto the middle third, and the top third is going to come down. And I'm going to use my rolling pin to seal each of the edges. And then I'm going to rotate by 90 degrees. A little bit of flour underneath, a little bit of flour on top. And then I'm going to roll it out again. A little bit of flour on there, put some margarine which has escaped. And this is becoming easier each time I roll. I've got a little bit of sticking going on here. Let's put some flour underneath. There we go. Right, and then we're going to divide it up into thirds one last time and dab our remaining margarine and lard onto the top 2 sections. So it's repeating the same thing. It's actually quite a nice therapeutic activity, I would say. I do really enjoy making flaky pastry. And I would advise trying to get your plate as clean as possible so as not to waste any of that fat. Okay, and last time we're going to fold up our bottom third, fold down the top third, and then we're going to roll it one more time. I've got rather a lot of escaped margarine here. Just scrape that little bit up there. Okay. Got rather a noisy rolling pin, haven't I? Okay, so now we should have created lots of layers which will puff up when they get into the oven. And now I've rolled out for one last time, I'm just going to fold this up into thirds and I'm going to refrigerate it, give the margarine and the lard a chance to get colder again because they've got quite soft with all my rolling and dabbing and mashing. So I'm going to just store it in a little bag in my fridge. I think half an hour to an hour is perfectly fine. If you wanted to make your pastry dough on one day and save it for another day, you perhaps don't have time to do everything, it can easily be frozen. And in fact, pastry sometimes works out even better when it's so lovely and cold and just defrosted. So I'm going to put this in my fridge now. And for our strawberry puffs, we will make use of some of the block margarine supplied by Sainsbury's today. I'm just going to remove these bits of margarine which have splidged out onto my worktop and clean off my rolling pin. Okay, so you'll need to put your oven to 220 degrees or gas mark 7, or if you have a fan oven, you should set it for 200 degrees. Now our first job is to roll out our pastry and create some lovely shapes to form our puffs. Right, so struggling to get that out. I don't know if you can see on the video, but there's hundreds of tiny little layers here of the pastry, which is what's going to puff up when we put them in the oven. And this is lovely and cold and firm, so it should roll out beautifully. Here we go. I'm just going to put some flour down on my worktop, a little bit of flour on top and a little bit of flour on my rolling pin. Okay, and what we want is a nice big rectangle. Well, this one is a lot firmer than the pastry that I was using before when I was making my own. Let's take a little bit of hard work, a little bit of a firmer hand. But the colder your pastry, the better. So that's a good sign. What we want is a very thin, we want to get it nice and thin, probably about the thickness of a pound coin. And again, remember, always checking that you move it around a little bit, add a little bit more flour onto your worktop. Okay, we're nearly there. I'm just going to roll it outwards a little bit as well. Okay. So I'm looking for the size a little bit larger than an A4 size of paper. And as I said, the thickness of a pound coin is perfect. These are going to puff up. So as thin as they start, they're not going to finish off that thin because they're going to puff up in the oven. Okay, I think we're nearly there now. You want to be able to cut plenty of shapes from your pastry. And the idea with any type of pastry really is you don't want to be rolling out lots of times. You want to get as many cuts out of your first rolling as possible. That's quite a workout, rolling that. Okay, there we go. Right, so there's a number of options. You could create square shapes very easily with a knife. So I'll show you that first. So if you've got a sharp edge, so this is my best edge here, I'm just going to trim it to make it square. And you can just cut a strip. And then you can cut your strip into square shapes, like this. And they can go straight onto your baking tray. So that's one option. If you have some cutters, you can use your cutters to create any shapes that you like. I would say to avoid the more fancy, intricate cutters for puff pastry because you will lose the definition as they puff up. So simpler shapes work really well. Love hearts would work. So I'm going to do a selection. I've got a circle cutter here. I'll do a couple of those. If you don't have any cutters, that is also not a problem. You could get a glass or a bowl, small bowl, and turn it upside down onto your pastry, and then you can cut around the edge. You can press down and cut around the edge with a knife, so that can be done as well. So there's lots of options. You don't need to have fancy cutters to do this just as well. There we go. And I quite like the stars when I've done this before. So I'm going to do a couple of stars. Make sure you spread out your dough shapes on the tray so they're not too close to one another. Okay. A couple of small star shapes. There we go. Right. I'll put this to one side for now. Now, what we would like from our pastry is a lovely golden finish on the top. Now, you can use a beaten egg, or you could use some milk, or you could use some beaten egg and milk mixed together. If you're dairy-free, plant-based milk works just as well for this. And you need a brush of some sort, pastry brush, or you could use the back of a spoon if you don't have a pastry brush. And you want to be just shake off any excess before you drop it on. We don't want to make them really soggy. And I should say that you should prick each of your pastry shapes before you add the milk. And this is going to stop our pastry from puffing up too much. We'd like it to puff up a bit, but not too much. There we go. And I'm going to brush each shape with milk. Trying not to get too much on the tin. And I'm going to just give a little sprinkle of sugar onto them. This will also add, it will add colour, certainly, as the sugar cooks, but it will also just add a touch of sweetness because we're not adding sugar anywhere else. There we go. And then these will go in the oven for 10 to 15 minutes. You'll be able to see when they're cooked because they'll be puffed up and they'll be golden brown and crispy on top. So those are going to go in my oven. Okay. And whilst your pastry shapes are cooking in the oven, you've got about between 10 and 15 minutes. Don't forget about them. You can prepare your cream and your strawberries. Right. In between uses, I'm just going to have a quick wipe around. Ready for our strawberries. I've washed the strawberries. And I'm going to slice them up now. So it's Wimbledon season, it's July, the strawberries are out in full bloom. You can go and pick your own strawberries, or you can go and buy them from the supermarket. But whatever way you get hold of your strawberries, always a good idea to wash them first. So I've given mine a good rinse. These are some lovely, really big red strawberries. So I'm going to slice my strawberries, and just wanted to show you a little tip. Some people chop off the strawberry here and then they slice the strawberry, but I think it's much better just to grab hold of the strawberry with one hand and twist the green part off with the other hand, and that way you don't waste as much strawberry as you would if you'd sliced the end bit off. Okay, I'm going to very finely as I can, slice my strawberries into thin slices like this. So you can have slices. It's quite nice to see the strawberries in your strawberry puffs. I might also, another option that I could do is I could chop the end parts of the strawberries into little tiny pieces, which I might want to stir through some of my cream or sprinkle in. There we go. Strawberries are a really lovely soft fruit. So if you've got little helpers or someone else who wants to help, really good for little helpers because they can use a normal cutlery knife to chop up strawberries, and you can teach them safe ways of holding the strawberry whilst they're slicing. So either making a bridge shape with their hand and then passing the knife underneath so their fingers are kept safe, or making a claw shape and slicing down. So there's a little bit of teaching you can do if you've got someone small at home who'd like to learn how to do things in the kitchen, or they'd like to be helpful. Okay, so I've sliced up my strawberries, and now I'm going to whip my cream. So double cream, best for whipping. I've got a whisk, an electric whisk. However, this can be done with a hand whisk, which I'll get out now. It just takes a little bit longer. And you just pour your cream into your bowl. A little bit goes a long way with cream. So you might not need the whole tub. Okay, and off we go. Okay, you need to keep a close eye on your cream when you're whisking. Some creams whisk a lot quicker than others, and you never quite know which one you're going to get. So you need to whisk, and then you'll keep a very close eye. You'll notice that it will start to become thick and more solid than liquid, but you don't want to go too far beyond that. Now I've got mine is just about ready. I'm going to give it another quick whisk, and I should start to see the lines of my whisk leaving a tray, kind of marks or imprints in the like a wheel type shape in the cream. That's it. Now my cream is solid, and you can see the lovely imprints in the cream. We have to be careful not to whisk it too long, because it becomes a bit more like cottage cheese, and separated. It doesn't look very attractive. So keep a very close eye when you're whisking your cream. Okay, so I have all my elements ready now. I've got my strawberries, I've got my cream, and my pastry shapes. Here's some I made earlier. As you can see, they've puffed up really nicely. And what I'm going to try and do here is I'm going to slice them in half, so they're making like a sandwich. Okay, so they're very delicate, so I'm going to just use a soaring motion. I'm not going to put too much force on them. And then I've got my 2 halves of each of my shapes. I really like the stars, and I'll show you why I really like the stars. Because when you layer them, you can either layer them like this, or you can twist them, and it creates a really pretty shape. So there's a nice little effect there. And I also really like the squares. They're very simple. They're probably the simplest one, and you don't need a cutter for them, but they look really quite sweet. You can make them look more like diamonds, put them on their side, or again you can rotate those and make a star shape. So I've got some shapes there. Let's do another circle. They smell lovely. They've got that lovely pastry aroma as I slice them. And at this point, if your pastry is in the oven, you should start smelling a lovely pastry aroma as well. Okay, so this thing, you'll need two spoons, or if you have such a thing as a piping bag, you can use a piping bag to help add your cream. So I'll show you both methods. The piping bag, you have to put the nozzle into the piping bag until it comes out the bottom. And it's quite handy to have a glass or a jug to stand your piping bag in when you add your cream. So first of all, I'll show you adding the cream just with a spoon. So you want to just use one spoon and dollop the cream on with the other spoon into your little puffs, and then you can add some chopped up strawberries or add your slices in there. So I've got chopped up strawberries in this one. It's nice to be able to see the strawberries so you know it's a strawberry product. Okay, you might want to add another touch of cream on top before you add your top layer. Oh, this is the top layer. Little tip to put it on the bottom layer. So I've had to do mine slightly upside down. There we go. And I'll turn that back up the right way now. There we go. Lovely. Okay, and if you want to use a piping bag, you'll need to use a spoon to add the cream into the piping bag. Perhaps a little bit quicker and easier to add to your puffs if you're using a piping bag, but it's certainly not essential. Most jobs can be done without specialist equipment. Okay, so I've added most of my cream into my piping bag, and I'm going to lift it up. And I'm not too worried that it hasn't all gone straight down to the bottom, because what I can do is I can squeeze it down to the bottom like this. And I'm going to give the top of my piping bag a twist. And then I'm just going to squeeze gently with the top hand and use the bottom hand to guide. I'm going to try this time to make sure I'm piping onto the bottom part of each shape. Okay, and the nozzle that I'm using is given some nice attractive shapes and texture to the cream. That's all of them. Okay, so I can add my slices of strawberries onto these, maybe smaller ones for smaller shapes. And I think for my little star here, I'm going to just add my chopped strawberry. I'll use my fingers. There we go. And then I might want to add just a little touch of cream on the top to make it really luxurious. And I can add the lovely tops. What a lovely treat. for when you're watching Wimbledon, or when you're enjoying the sun outside, or you have some people round. I'm going to twist that star. There we go. I might serve these on a pretty plate or a cake stand, and I might even sprinkle a little bit of icing sugar on the top and pass it through a little sieve or a tea strainer. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I hope you have good fun trying out this and maybe being a bit creative. You might add different fruits, you might try different shapes, but I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for listening.